You jibber jab, bamboozle, nuka noozle, bippity bop, she called. You jibber jab, bamboozle, nuka noozle, bippity bop, she called. I mean, you keep on talking, but you don't know where to turn it off.
Welcome to the weekend. I'm Jon Caldara, president of the Independence Institute. Thanks for watching Independent Thinking. This last legislative session, we had an interesting bill that just barely failed. It would have put together a pact with other states to get rid of the Electoral College. This doesn't sound like a big deal, but at first, changing the Electoral College sounds like a nice idea. To talk to us about it, Tara Ross, who is the author, among other things, this terrific book called Defending Democracy. We'll talk about that in a minute. Every 4 years, we have to go through this little civics lesson when we elect a president. And we have to go back and say, here's how it works. We don't actually elect a president, we actually elect electors. These are the Electoral College, which has nothing to do with electricians, and then we go out and they do the dirty work. Explain why the founders created this system.
Well, the founders lived in a world where they were fighting for a self-governing nation. They had just fought a whole war over this. They had no representation in Parliament. Self-governance was very important to them. But on the other hand, they knew that if you live in a pure democracy, 51% of the people will rule the other 49% all the time without question, no matter what's going on. In the wake of something like 9/11, in emotion or panic or rage, 51% of the people could do whatever they want to the other 49%. So the founders wanted
isn't that what our nation does anyway? We have this republic, but it really is a democracy. Once we get 51% of anything, they usually call the shots.
Well, that's not true, because if you have Congress, and that's true in each branch, but you've got one branch that is one person, one vote representation, the Congress, the House of Representatives, where it is based purely on population. In the Senate, it is one state, one vote. So that is in itself not a purely democratic composition that we have for our Congress. We have other things like a constitutional amendment process that requires a supermajority to pass. We have presidential vetoes. We have supermajority requirements for other things. So this is not something that is new, that exists only in the Electoral College, that we combine not only democratic elements, but also Republican, small r, elements, and federalism. We have a government that blends several different governmental principles because the founders
the idea, when you think about it, of the three branches of government, you could argue that only really one-sixth of our government was truly democratic, because you had originally the senators were not elected by people. They were elected by state legislators. You've got the president that's not elected by the people. He's elected by the Electoral College. You've got the judicial branch. That's all appointed and then confirmed by the Senate. And so the only part that really was truly democratic, if you will, which was originally the House of Representatives. So very small amount of the federal government in its original intent was supposed to be direct democracy. Why?
Well, that's a fair statement.
When you say that you're worried about 49% of the people getting abused by 51, most people say, well, that's just democracy.
Well, but the founders knew that pure democracies, historically speaking, implode. And the reason they implode is because over time, the 51% tends to abuse the 49%. They tend to impose unreasonable regulations or rules or trample on their rights, and there's nothing to stop them. In our government, we have lots of protections, and we have protections because the founders decided every aspect of government will not be purely democratic. It will have democratic aspects to it. The democracy in our government is combined with other things to protect us.
So in other words, if you on an issue, people say, I believe in democracy, and as long as 51% of the people want it, we should have it. The response is, well, then if 51% of the population wants to bring back slavery, you're okay with that. And you go, whoa, no, that's different. And it's because we've got these protections.
Or 51% of the people want to throw anybody they suspect of being a terrorist in jail after 9/11. Because they can, because it's a pure democracy and 51% wins.
So when passions are high, things can happen, which is, again, that 1/6 of the government, which was the Congress, was supposed to react to more temporary feelings. That's why they're up every 2 years versus the Senate up every 6 years, President for 4 years, and judges for a lifetime.
The House of Representatives is meant to be directly accountable to the people, to be a more directly self-governing aspect of our government, because the founders also thought that was really important. They had escaped a nation where they had no voice at all.
Bringing back to the Electoral College, though, every 4 years we have this big vote, and you see the tally, all right? And the tally is this amount to that amount, and sometimes the popular vote isn't the same as the electoral vote. So in other words, Bush-Gore would probably be the best example, where Gore won the popular vote. But there really is no popular vote, is there? We do that kind of as a curiosity. There's no, we have 51 separate state votes.
Exactly. The popular vote in our nation has no legal relevance whatsoever. It's something we do, I guess, because we like to see the totals. In reality, you have 51 purely Democratic elections in this country, one in each of the states and one in the District of Columbia. And so that's purely Democratic in the state, but we combine those purely Democratic elections with the Federalist element. So each state is represented in the presidential election process.
But then we hear, people don't get it, all right? People just don't get it. And then when Bush-Gore happens, every now and then, how many times has the popular vote gone one way, but the other guy wins?
Really twice. You will hear people say more. The two times are 2000 and 1888, where undisputably just the popular vote winner did not get the presidency. You will hear people cite 1876. That was in the aftermath of Reconstruction. There was a ton of fraud and there was other stuff going on. I do not feel like it is a fair example. 1824, you'll hear people cite that also, but not all states were conducting popular votes as we think of them today. So that popular vote tally is an incomplete one. It does not include all the states. So that's not a fair example either.
So only a couple times in our history has the popular vote gone one way and the electoral vote gone the other way. All right, but in 2000, people looked at this and they were hacked off. They didn't understand, oh, this guy won. Then why is this guy in office? So there's been this push, and it seems to come around every now and then to get rid of the Electoral College. What's the main reason they want to do it?
I think people just feel that, well, first of all, they don't understand the Electoral College. It's not taught in our schools. I don't think people know the history of it, why the founders did this, the things we've been talking about republics versus democracies. Secondly, I think they just have this gut instinct that the way the most people feel is how the election should come out. That's a nice soundbite. In reality, most Americans will never agree on anything, much less the identity of their president. We are much too diverse. Way too many different special interest groups and things going on in our country. Different states have different interests, different local and regional interests. The Electoral College actually does not produce probably the favorite for the most people, but it produces a really good second choice candidate for most Americans as represented by their states, because it creates a process that requires presidents to build national coalitions, to go across state lines. They cannot go camp out in California or in New York or in Houston and just get as many votes as they can in one place.
When you talk about the most populous states, you're talking about New York, California, Texas, you know, Illinois, perhaps Florida. And so if there was just a popular election, states like Colorado, we would become pretty irrelevant pretty quickly.
Oh, sure. Sure, but I think multiple things would happen. I think when you're thinking about a world without the Electoral College, you need to kind of get rid of some preconceptions you have based on what today's elections look like. You need to not assume that we'd have a strong two-party system and that there would be one Republican and one Democrat, and we would just be trying to ramp up votes for as many votes as we can for one of those two candidates. Third-party candidates would have a lot more strength. There would be a lot more candidates in the election. You'd have 5, 6, 10 candidates easily.
When you say this, I've heard you say this. Explain this to me.
Yes.
Right now we've got a pretty strong two-party system. It's not dictated by the Constitution, as some people seem to think. It's not a part of government. It's just the way that things have evolved here. We can have as many parties as we like, and in fact, when you vote for president, you often see a half-dozen different candidates you've never heard of. You got the Constitution Party and the Libertarian Party and the Green Party, and it keeps going on, the Socialist Party, the Communist Party, and you see these names usually you haven't heard of. And occasionally you get a third party that you've actually heard of, like Ross Perot back in, what was it, 1992.